When I got into a cage with a Komodo dragon almost 10 years ago for a story, I had no idea that its skull was so special. Neither did scientists until now, but a report in the Journal of Anatomy reveals that the world's largest living lizard has a remarkable space frame skull. Space frame refers to a light, rigid structure with interlocking struts that can handle big loads. The shape of the skull bones and the arrangement of bones of different strengths is the key. The researchers employed a technique called finite element analysis, which is usually used to analyze trains or planes, but in this case it let them reverse engineer the Komodo to study the mechanical forces that the skull is subject to. As opposed to, say, an alligator, the dragon has a pretty wimpy bite, so rather than clamp down on its victims, it yanks off chunks of meat, a move powered by incredibly strong neck muscles, and made possible by that space frame skull able to handle the huge forces involved. Our March 1999 article on Komodos is available at 𝗙𝗹𝘀𝗀𝗲.
In last week's pre-Christmas rush, the U.S. Congress slammed together the $1 trillion federal budget bill for 2015 just before funds ran out. But the bill wasn't all about the money. Congress took advantage of the fiscal scramble to change rules about the environment and energy, which do not belong in appropriation bills. Normally, such changes are encoded in what are called laws and are debated out in the open. But the budget bill is a chance for Congress to slip in controversial rules, called riders, without much debate. If members object, the bill stalls, and the government shuts down, and no one wants to be blamed for that fiasco. So the riders gallop in. The Environmental Protection Agency got its budget, for instance, but with strings attached. Although agriculture is a major source of atmospheric methane, the EPA now is prohibited from using its money to require farmers to report greenhouse gas emissions, and the agency cannot regulate farm ponds and irrigation ditches under the Clean Water Act. In another example, the Department of Agriculture must speed up permits for companies making genetically modified organisms, and the feds must loan money to firms to build coal-fired power plants overseas. That requirement reverses a previous ban. These rules and others last through September 2015 when this budget bill runs out. And then, if history is any guide, the whole stealth legislation process will start all over again.
A baby's cries for food might drive a tired parent to aggravation, but some species take more drastic measures, like the burying beetle, 𝗙𝗿𝗄𝗃, which punishes its pesky children by eating them. Researchers wanted to get to the bottom of an age-old question in evolutionary biology, the origin of begging. Natural selection favors a greedy, well-fed child, but it also favors parents who dole out food evenly to their young and save some for themselves. So how do you resolve that parent-child conflict? Burying beetles do so by putting the ultimate price on pleading, death. Begging larvae were 13 times more likely than laid-back larvae to be eaten by mom, which may discourage them from asking for more than their fair share of the grub. That finding appears in the journal Behavioral Ecology. Humans have different standards than beetles do, of course. For us, pestering your parents may be a good thing. One study suggests crying is a sign of good health, which might lower a baby's chances of being neglected or abused. Then again, after those first few years, you're probably better off not being a crybaby.
November 24th marks the 150th anniversary of the publication of Darwin's Origin of Species. On November 19th, a guy named Ray Comfort, who does not accept evolution, will celebrate the fact that when copyrights expire and works enter the public domain, you're free to do with them what you will. Thus, Comfort will be distributing his own edition of Darwin's masterwork with a new introduction. This is roughly the equivalent of me finger painting on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel so as to improve the work. According to the folks at the National Center for Science Education, the NCSE, who monitor efforts to interfere with evolution education in public schools, Comfort in his intro repeats numerous familiar anti-evolution claims. For example, that there's a lack of transitional fossils, and that the second law of thermodynamics makes evolution impossible. These assertions have been disproved more often than the chant, "Yankees suck." The NCSE has set up a website with useful, truthful info. It's at www.don'tdisdarwin.com, all one word, no apostrophe. Indeed, don't diss Darwin, it leads me to discomfort.
You've landed a small role in a low-budget horror movie. To get ready, you need to practice your reaction shot. You know, that look you'll get when your boss peels off his face to reveal the slime-oozing alien he really is. So, look in the mirror and give us some terror. If you're doing it right, your eyes are wide open and your eyebrows are raised. But why is that? I mean, how come people, when they're scared, all make a similar face? Darwin thought there was a reason, that our expressions evolved because they offer some benefit. And scientists from Ontario think Darwin was right. They asked volunteers to try to look frightened, and then they measured the physiological effects. They found that making a fraidy face allows people to see farther, locate targets faster, and take in more air when they breathe. The findings appear in the current online issue of Nature Neuroscience. Those reactions make sense because if you see something startling or out of the ordinary, you can use your fear-enhanced vision to assess the situation. And, if need be, take a deep, fear-boosted breath, and run! It's a familiar story. When immigrants arrive in a new place, they tend to stick together, forming segregated enclaves that feel like a home away from home. Then, over time, they become assimilated and integrate into the local community. It was true of the German and Irish immigrants who came to the U.S. in the 1800s, and it's also true of elephants when they find themselves in unfamiliar territory. In managing wild elephant populations, rangers will often transport the animals from one place to another, removing them from a familiar habitat and placing them in one that's new. So scientists in California got to wondering how elephants, which are highly social creatures, handle making themselves at home when they get to a new neighborhood. Turns out they start by forming enclaves that are the elephant equivalent of a ghetto, where the new pachyderms in the park associate with one another, and with other immigrant elephants. Then, once the transplants have been around for a year, they get friendly with the locals, findings that were published by the Royal Society on December 10th. The cautious approach seems to be a good one. Not knowing whether the natives are friendly, it's probably best not to step on any toes. Especially if you're an elephant.
It was in 1891 that the American Buddhist Henry Steele Olcott, co-founder of the Theosophical Society, came to Australia. Here he attended a series of lectures which led to a greater awareness of Buddhism in small circles of the upper-class society in Australia. It is believed that the first Buddhist monk visited Australia in 1910. Soon, more monks started visiting Australia, but during the period 1986 to 1991, the number has increased manifold. During this phase, Buddhism gained immense support from its ardent devotees, who were committed towards this religion. The first formal Buddhist organization in Australia was the Buddhist Study Group, Melbourne. It was formed by Len Bullen in 1938. Today, it is not at all surprising to come across various publications at any bookshop that displays vibrant and colorful images of Lord Buddha or some symbols relating to the faith. Today, the population following this faith is made up not only of people of Asian origin, it has cast a spell on a large number of natives as well.
Sometimes it's not what you eat, but when you eat it, at least when it comes to longevity diets. For some time, scientists have known that animals kept on a strict diet live longer than their well-fed peers. But this Methuselah meal plan is no ordinary just say no to that second slice of pie kind of diet. To reap the life-extending benefits, some of these animals cut their calorie consumption in half. Such a diet might be doable for captive mice and monkeys, but it'd be a tough sell for people. Then, 5 years ago, studies in mice suggested that intermittent fasting would work just as well. These mice abstain from eating every other day and live longer than their gluttonous comrades, without really skimping on the total calories they consumed. Now scientists at Kyoto University have found the same thing in worms that fasted every third day, and they found a gene that regulates the effect, results reported in the journal Nature. Like the mice, these fasting worms did not cut their total calorie intake, but they boosted their lifespan by 50% and showed fewer signs of physical decline than their peers. So go ahead, enjoy that extra slice of pie, because tomorrow's another day to not eat.
We've all heard exercise is good for your physical and mental well-being, but a good workout can actually influence the mental well-being of others, too, because bosses who hit the gym tend to be less abusive to their employees. That's according to a study in the Journal of Business and Psychology. Researchers asked 98 MBA students who were also employed full-time to rate how their supervisors treated them by responding to statements like, "My boss puts me down in front of others." The researchers also had supervisors fill out a different survey about their stress levels and weekly exercise. And as the authors expected, the more stressed out supervisors were, the more their employees felt belittled by them. But the employees felt better about bosses who exercised, whether it was yoga, cardio, or weightlifting. And just 1 or 2 days a week did the trick. Exercise didn't simply melt away the stress. Bosses who worked out reported feeling just as much pressure as their sedentary counterparts. Active bosses just spared subordinates the verbal attacks. So next time you feel like telling your boss to take a hike, it might actually be sound advice.
The eastern gray tree frog looks exactly like the closely related Koepp's gray tree frog. The big difference between the two species is beneath the surface. The eastern has twice the number of chromosomes, as does the Koepp's. Having more sets of chromosomes makes the cells of the eastern frog larger than the cells found in the Koepp's, and those bigger cells makes the eastern's song just a little deeper. Now University of Missouri researcher Carl Gerhardt and his student Mitch Tucker have determined that the slight difference in the calls, here's the eastern again, and here's the Koepp's, is how the females know which species males to buddy up with, the ones with the same chromosome number that they have. The work is in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B, Biological Sciences. Speciation is often caused by a geographic barrier that keeps populations from mating, but the tree frog situation may be a rare case in which chromosome duplication and its subsequent effects presented a reproductive barrier. As in humans, it comes down to whether he calls. Here's an impassioned plea for gun control. Of nail guns, that is, because accidents involving nail guns have gone through the renovated roof. In 2005, almost 15,000 people were treated in U.S. emergency rooms for nail gun injuries. That's twice the number in 2001 and 3 times the injuries back in 1991, according to data released in the April 13th issue of Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report put out by the CDC. The rising popularity of do-it-yourselfing seems to be behind the unfortunate trend. Most injuries are puncture wounds to the hands, followed by hits to the forearms, legs, and feet. 6% of the wounded wind up being hospitalized. Although better safety instruction would no doubt help, the report's authors suggest a systems approach to the problem. They'd like nail guns to be impossible to fire until the nose was depressed, which would presumably happen only when the gun was flush up against whatever needed nailing. By the way, 96% of the injured were males, which could mean that they're doing most of the work or that women read the instructions.
The pain-relieving effects of drugs like ibuprofen are well known, but ibuprofen and its relatives, known as non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, may someday have another use, as antibiotics. Researchers tested 3 anti-inflammatory drugs, bromfenac, used in eye drops, and carprofen and vetiprofen, both for treating conditions like arthritis in dogs. The investigators found that all 3 drugs bind to something called the DNA clamp in bacteria. That clamp's essential to repairing and replicating DNA. By jamming it, the painkillers can actually kill 𝗙𝗍𝗀𝗀, in a test tube at least. The findings appear in the journal Chemistry and Biology. Study author Aaron Oakley of Australia's University of Wollongong says we still need clinical trials to tell if this trick holds true in humans. But this study's a first step.
Yeah, I guess it alerts a lot of clinicians to the fact that some of the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories that they're using may have this off-target effect.
And it gives drug developers, like Oakley and his colleagues, a whole new way to attack antibiotic-resistant bacteria.
Breaking a mirror means 7 years bad luck, and so does spilling salt or meeting a black cat. We've all heard such silly-sounding superstitions. Of course, why anybody would believe that stepping on a crack could break your mother's back is a mystery. But according to an article in the Royal Society journal Biological Sciences, superstitious behaviors are a natural product of evolution. Imagine an animal living in an environment where, over the course of a day, he might hear some rustling in the leaves or maybe in the grass. Now, movements in the grass could signal a predator attack, whereas the breeze in the trees is probably just the wind. Still, the animal has a choice. He can ignore all this rustling and go about his business, or he can run and hide. The most logical response would be to hide only when he hears the grass move. But what if it's hard to tell whether the noise came from the grass or the trees? Well, I could have sworn that was the trees, could be his final thought. So the animal learns to bolt at the sound of the breeze because it could foretell certain doom. That better safe than sorry attitude is essentially a superstition, one that cautious critter will likely pass on to his young. Knock on wood.
Global warming might seem like a botanical boon. After all, milder temperatures and more carbon dioxide and nitrogen should feed flora. But a 10-year study has found that any initial positive effect on plant growth from climate change may soon disappear. The report is in the journal Nature Climate Change. Researchers transplanted vegetation from 4 grassland ecosystems to lower, warmer elevations. They also modified the precipitation at the transplant sites based on altered rainfall estimates. For the first year, the plants did great, producing more biomass and churning out more oxygen for us. But their productivity went down for the rest of the decade. What happened? Warming did speed up the nitrogen cycle, which should have increased nitrogen's availability as plant fertilizer, but a lot of the nitrogen left the soil through runoff or uptake into the atmosphere. In addition, productive native plants began to lose out to species that thrive at higher temperatures but are less productive than the natives. Warmer temperatures may spur immediate growth, but in the long term, we can't expect plants to like it hot.
Plants can't choose where their seeds end up. Some float on the wind, others on the water. Many seeds hitch a ride on or inside animals. And the farther a seed gets from its parent, and any predators or disease the parent might have, the better its chance of survival. Or so the theory goes. Researchers studied that phenomenon in the South American chili pepper Capsicum chacoense, which relies on birds like flycatchers to spread its seed. To get realistic samples, researchers plucked chili seeds from the droppings of captive flycatchers. Then they scattered them near and far from wild chili bushes in Bolivia. Contrary to the prevailing theory, distant seeds fared no better than seeds directly beneath chili plants. But it turns out the trip through the birds gave seeds a different competitive edge. The passage stripped them of predator-attracting chemicals and pathogenic fungi, which quadrupled the seed's survival rate compared to their undigested counterparts. The results appear in the journal Ecology Letters. So even though these chili seeds don't need to go the distance to survive, you might say that a seed in the bird is worth about 4 on the bush.
Some scientists say the use of fire helped make us modern humans. It dramatically changed what and how we eat and may have even altered our anatomy. But University of Utah anthropologist Polly Wiesner thinks that fire was also important in shaping human social interactions and cultural traditions. Her conclusions are in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Wiesner evaluated day and night activities and conversations of Kalahari Bushmen from Botswana and Namibia. These communities still live by hunting and gathering, as most humans did over evolutionary history. During the day, nearly a third of the conversations dealt with economic issues such as hunting strategies and foraging plans. Another third covered complaints, criticisms, and gossip. But at night, around the fire, more than 80% of group conversations were storytelling, often about people living far away or in the spirit world. Wiesner says that humans are unique in that we create ties to others outside of our immediate group. Gathering at the fire expanded listeners' imaginations and allowed for the development of cognitive processes that made it possible to form those links to distant communities, which makes fire the precursor to Facebook.
Beauty is only skin deep, and the beauty of shiny white teeth is even less deep, because a new study shows that fluoride forms a thinner protective shield than experts thought it did. The results appear in the Surface Science journal, Langmuir. American consumers spend more than $50 billion a year fighting cavities, and when we realized fluoride could help, we put it in our drinking water, our toothpaste, and our mouthwash. But how does fluoride work its magic? Many figured that fluoride chemically reacts with the main mineral in enamel to form a thick, decay-resistant veneer. But the latest research kicks that idea in the teeth. Scientists in Germany used X-ray photoelectron spectroscopy to get a detailed image of the surface of a treated tooth, and they found that the protective covering is actually only 6 nanometers thick. That's about a 15,000th as thick as a sheet of paper, and a layer that skimpy would likely be worn away by ordinary chewing. How fluoride keeps the tooth fairy away is a mystery that researchers are still working to unravel. In the meantime, we may not know how it works, but we know that it works. So keep brushing.
Science fiction is filled with stories of planets circling distant stars. Now, astronomers have produced the first image of multiple planets circling a star that's not our sun. The planets are 5 to 13 times more massive than Jupiter, and their order by size mimics our own solar system. The discovery is in the November 14th issue of the journal Science. Astronomers faced a big challenge finding those planets. Telescopes can't just catch a planet in orbit. So a common method is to determine the planet's gravitational pull on their home star, but that only works for planets whose orbit is relatively close to their sun. Newer procedures measure infrared radiation from recently formed planets, and a technique called adaptive optics is also used to create images of planets. It corrects for the fact that the glare of the home star makes nearby planets difficult to see. It was adaptive optics that made the new solar system visible to us. In other world news, a planet's been found orbiting the star 𝗙𝗏 just 25 light-years from Earth. Next year, they'll find out who gets elected president, Reagan or Mondale.
Imagine Van Gogh's paintings of yellow sunflowers. Now, imagine the flowers brown. Not so good. Sadly, we may someday see what that would look like, because the bright yellow paints on the canvas are slowly turning muddy. Now, an international team of scientists has pinpointed the chemical reaction that drives this degradation, the first step toward stopping it. Their findings appear in the journal Analytical Chemistry. Van Gogh's use of strong, bright colors to convey mood and emotion marks a major milestone in art history, and his sunflower series wouldn't be the same without the vibrant chrome-yellow pigment that was new at the time. But this color darkens when exposed to the sun. To find out why, researchers used X-ray analyses to determine the exact chemical composition of the paint as it browns. First, they exposed 3 tubes of chrome yellow to UV radiation until one turned a chocolate color. Analyzing that sample, they identified specific changes in the paint's chromium compounds. They then found the same chemical signature in the darkened areas of 2 Van Gogh paintings. Until a chemical antidote is found, the researchers have some ironic advice. Keep sunlight away from Van Gogh's sunflowers.
Scientists hope to build nanoscale robots to deliver medicine to specific sites in our bodies, but supplying energy to the nanobots so that they can carry out these tasks is one of the stumbling blocks in developing the technology. So researchers have turned to sperm. Tiny sperm need plenty of energy to swim their way to their target, and Alex Travis at Cornell University is trying to take advantage of what sperm do naturally for use in nanobots. Sperm have 2 methods of creating energy. Their mitochondria generate chemical energy, but they can also break down glucose. That process requires 10 enzymes that attach to a sheath running down the sperm's tail. Travis and his team are trying to recreate that enzymatic process. They're developing enzymes that bind to nickel ions on a chip instead of to sperm. So far, they've managed to attach 3 of the 10 enzymes necessary, and they've shown that the chip enzymes can act in a series. If they can attach all 10, the nanobots could potentially use glucose in blood to swim their way to diseased cells. PCR, the polymerase chain reaction, is a crucial tool. The DNA amplification technique is used in genome sequencing, forensics, and the diagnosis of various diseases. To give researchers more genetic material to work with, a PCR instrument repeatedly heats and cools an original biological sample, which gives enzymes a chance to replicate the DNA millions of times so it can be more easily analyzed. Such sequence amplification would be a boon to diagnosis in a doctor's office, especially when an infectious disease is spreading rapidly. Unfortunately, genetic tests usually take a day or 2 to complete. But researchers at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory aim to speed up the process. First, they created an extremely fast thermal cycle in which a sample experiences 45 degrees Celsius temperature changes per second. Then they searched for DNA amplification enzymes that could operate at that thermal cycling speed, and they found 2 that worked without any tweaking. The technique accomplishes a billion-fold amplification in well under 3 minutes. The work is in the journal Analyst. The system could make it possible to identify food contamination virtually instantly, or an infection before you even finish coughing.
Are smarter people drawn to music, theater, and dance? Or does arts training in childhood change the brain in positive ways? In 2004, the philanthropic Dana Foundation created a consortium of neuroscientists from 7 universities to address those questions. On March 4th, the group released a report, Learning Arts in the Brain, available at dana.org. Some of the findings. An interest in performing arts helps develop sustained attention spans, which can improve other areas of cognition. Links exist between training in music and the ability to manipulate information in both short-term and long-term memory. Music training also appears to improve kids' capacity for geometric representation, as well as the acquisition of reading skills. Acting classes lead to improved memory via better language skills. Dance learning is done through observation and mimicry, and that training appears to improve other cognitive skills. So science says that dance, theater, and music can make life full of sound and glory, signifying something. For some reason, every year a few dozen runners dash from southern Italy all the way to the North Cape of Norway in what's called the Trans-Europe Foot Race. It takes about 2 months to cover the almost 2,800 miles, about 45 miles a day. In the 2009 edition, 44 of the 66 participants allowed themselves to be examined medically throughout. The findings were presented November 29th at the annual meeting of the Radiological Society of North America in Chicago, and some of the discoveries may be of use to the less ambitious among us. Muscle volume of the legs actually went down 7% because of the incredible energy consumption of the daily distances, and some leg injuries were found to be safe to run through. It was okay to keep going with simple leg muscle inflammation, for example, but other overuse injuries like joint inflammation carried a greater risk of worsening. Runners lost 40% of their body fat in the first half of the race and 50% altogether. Beginning runners can likewise expect to see a rapid fat loss at first, and you get to stop before reaching Norway. It's been called the vine that ate the South. Kudzu grows so fast it can completely cover a cabin in the woods in a couple of days. The invasive plant takes over another 150,000 acres every year, which costs another $6 million to control. But plant pathologists with the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Research Service have gotten promising results with a fungus that itself rapidly spreads in kudzu. The fungus is called 𝗙𝗻𝘀𝗀𝗃. In early tests, the fungus killed all kudzu seedlings and at least 90% of older plants. Most important, 𝗙𝗻𝘀𝗀𝗃 did little or no damage to the species that commonly live in habitats infested with kudzu, such as pine, oak, cedar, pecan, hickory, blackberry, and, of course, sassafras. So what's the catch? The fungus produces chemicals called trichothecenes, which can damage the health of humans and animals. But the researchers discovered that if they grew the fungus in a fermenter or on a liquid diet, the production of the toxins fell precipitously. If the fungus can be safely let loose one day, it could finally give kudzu the heave-ho. A good poker face can hide the quality of your cards, but your arms might still be giving away your hands. That's the finding of a study to come out in the journal Psychological Science. Volunteers watched videos of the World Series of Poker. The videos were edited so the subjects saw one of 3 different views of the players: the poker players' entire bodies from the table up, or just the players' faces, or just the players' arms pushing chips into the pot.
When participants were watching chips being pushed in the center of the table by the players, it was only then could they accurately perceive how good a hand was better than chance. They couldn't do it from the whole body, and if anything, they were worse from just watching the face.
Michael 𝗙𝗵𝗃, a psychology doctoral student at Stanford University and a co-author of the study. No pros were among the video watchers, but there's some evidence that, as might be expected, they'd be even better at catching arm cues.
In one of our studies, the more participants were familiar with poker, even though they were all novices, the better they did.
Take a deep breath. Taste anything? Actually, your lungs may, because scientists have discovered that the same receptors that exist on the tongue to taste bitter substances are also found on the smooth muscle of the lungs. Researchers were studying the receptors on smooth lung muscles that regulate contraction and relaxation of the airways. That's when they made the discovery, which was so unexpected that the researchers themselves were skeptical. Finally, they became convinced that the receptors were really there, though not clustered in taste buds as they are on the tongue. The scientists then exposed human and mouse airways to various bitter compounds to gauge the effects. Many toxic compounds are bitter, so the researchers expected the lung muscle to tense up and contract to compel the breather to move away from whatever was bitter and perhaps toxic. But in a second surprise, bitter compounds relaxed and opened airways better than any existing asthma drug. The study is in the journal Nature Medicine. Researchers will continue to search for the role of the receptors. Meanwhile, the work represents a surprising new lead in the search for drugs to treat asthma, emphysema, or chronic bronchitis.
With H1N1 on the rise and flu shots hard to find, few things are as terrifying as... But now a report in the journal Psychological Science suggests that coughing and sneezing can spread more than viruses. They also spread fear of germs and more. So you're online for a movie when the guy behind you lets loose a big juicy... Maybe you hold your breath, or maybe you decide to skip the flick and go home to scrub your hands like you're Lady Macbeth. Well, psychologists got to wondering whether that well-grounded caution could snowball into an overarching skittishness about disease and other things. So they stationed a colleague on a college campus and had her sneeze loudly as students walked by. They then asked those students to estimate the risk the average American runs of having a heart attack or getting killed in an accident. Sure enough, kids who'd heard sneezing were more doom and gloom than those who got away scot-tissue-free. They also found that folks who were coughed on were more likely to favor federal funding for flu vaccines than for the creation of green jobs. The findings, needless to say, are nothing to sneeze at.
Some people like to think there's something fated about who we fall in love with. It's that perfect mix of attraction, compatibility, and of course timing. But in some cases, fate may be taking its cues from birth control pills. First, let's go over a woman's cycle and how that affects attraction. When women are ovulating, their features change in ways that men unconsciously pick up. So men are particularly attracted to women when they're fertile. And it works the other way too. When a woman is fertile, she's more attracted to men with more traditionally masculine features and who are genetically dissimilar to her, or more compatible in terms of procreating. Of course, oral contraception changes a woman's hormonal cycles. Her body thinks it's pregnant and doesn't go through ovulation-induced changes. And in a study published this month in the journal Trends in Ecology and Evolution, researchers say that women on the pill do not show the ovulation-induced attraction to genetically dissimilar partners. So they might be choosing men who are more genetically similar, which could lead to some of the problems with conception that have become increasingly common, because attraction isn't fate, it's chemistry.
The epidemic swept the world. Fortunately, it was only the World of Warcraft, a popular online role-playing game. But that got the attention of real disease experts at Tufts and Rutgers universities. That's because the accidental outbreak that attacked the virtual characters offered a unique opportunity to study how social groups can help spread a disease. In late 2005, the epidemic hit the World of Warcraft, played by millions. It all started with an error. One creature was supposed to infect only a few virtual players with so-called corrupted blood. But some of the nastiest virtual inhabitants exploited a flaw and spread the disease to unsuspecting masses. The virtual quarantines game designers tried to impose didn't work, in part because the virtual people didn't follow them, and so entire virtual cities were virtually destroyed. The experts were fascinated because they've never had a way to realistically simulate how large groups of people will react to an epidemic. But the cure for a real epidemic still won't be as easy as the virtual one was. They just reprogram the computers.
It's no secret cigarettes can yellow your teeth, but tobacco smoke has another unseen effect. It can wipe out the healthy bacteria in your mouth, leaving the field open for pathogenic bugs, like the kind that cause gum disease. So says a study in the journal Infection and Immunity. Researchers gave a complete dental cleaning to 30 volunteers, half of whom were regular smokers. Then, as bacteria moved back in, they took plaque samples and sequenced the DNA in those scrapings. And they found that non-smokers tended to have stable bacterial communities, dominated by a few benign species. That's good, because a healthy biofilm educates your immune system, preventing unnecessary attacks and inflammation, and it keeps bad bacteria at bay. Smokers, on the other hand, had wildly transient populations, with species moving in and out, which opened up real estate for the bad bugs. Smokers also had higher levels of inflammation, which can destroy friendly bacteria too. The researchers aren't sure yet why smoking has this effect, but if you're looking for a new reason to quit, how about avoiding your dentist? Thanks for the minute. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher 𝗙𝗏𝗪𝗏. During the 2008 presidential election, the internet became a giant rumor mill. For example, there were the viral emails claiming Barack Obama's birth certificate was a fake, or one spreading the phony 𝗙𝗵𝗀 quote, "God made dinosaurs 4,000 years ago." Some political scholars worry the web could undermine democracy by misinforming and polarizing voters. But websites and blogs don't serve up the most influential rumors. Our inboxes do. So says a study of email in the journal Human Communication Research. Just after the election, researcher 𝗙𝗿𝗀𝘀 randomly surveyed 600 Americans about their online habits and whether they'd heard and believed a number of widespread rumors. He found that the web does expose us to more rumors, but the web also delivers more rebuttals, which can even the field. Email is more insidious because you're more likely to believe that rumor forwarded by Cousin Rob. And the more you believe something, Garrett says, the more you want to share it with your social network, spawning a nasty cascade of misperception. So before you hit send to forward email, ask yourself, do I know the item I'm sharing is true, or do I just want it to be? Thanks for the minute. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher 𝗙𝗏𝗀𝗲.
The World Series starts October 22nd with the improbable American League champion Tampa Bay Rays hosting the National League best Philadelphia Phillies. And there's a 59% chance that the Rays will take the title. That's what Bruce Bouquet says, anyway. He's a mathematician at the New Jersey Institute of Technology who sets odds on the playoffs and World Series every year. Bouquet starts with each player's statistics for the 2008 season. He then uses a model that estimates run production per game based on those stats. His most probable outcomes are a 20% chance of a Rays championship in 6 games and a 19% chance of a 7-game Rays win. But beware, in the 2006 postseason, only one of his favorites in the 7 different series actually came out victorious. Nevertheless, he's gotten it right in 6 of the last 8 years. Of course, when predicting sporting events, always followed the advice of Damon Runyon, who said, "The race is not always to the swift nor the battle to the strong, but that's the way to bet." Whee! That's the sound a snail makes when it's riding on the back of a turtle. When they're not riding turtles, though, snails produce a little mucus trail as they creep along the ground. Well, according to research just published in the Proceedings of the Royal Society Biological Sciences, snails also ride along on pre-existing mucus trails left by other snails. It's like a snail superhighway. Okay, a snail highway. Okay, a snail way. The research involved marine snails, but probably applies to all snails, which may expend a third of all their energy producing mucus. So an obvious benefit is that individual snails can save energy that would otherwise go into cutting fresh trails. Snail experts had thought this was the case, but the new study proves it, and it wasn't easy. The researchers actually measured the thickness of snail trails. A new trail could accommodate a second traveler without additional mucus, but weathered trails got thicker as snails added a bit of mucus where necessary.
Here's a strange tale of two previously unrelated food products. First, chitlins, that delicacy of fried pig large intestines. They're well loved throughout the South, especially during the upcoming holiday season. But the smell of them cooking inspires significantly less affection because the cooking process sometimes smells like, well, feces. Researchers in Japan thought that cilantro could help, because cilantro is used in a variety of cuisines around the world to mask smells as well as to add distinctive flavors. And in a previous study, the research team had shown that cilantro can mask the cooking chitlin stench. In the new research, in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry, they isolated cilantro's volatile compounds and tested each one for its odor-fighting power. Many seem to lessen the stink, but one in particular, according to human sniffers, entirely cancels out the odor. It's called 𝗖𝗍_undecadienol. It works at a very low concentration, 10 parts per billion, so you can't smell the compound. It's not masking the chitlin odor, it's actually neutralizing it. So it's not just better living through chemistry, it's better chitlins too.
Sometimes a bit of bacteria can be just what the doctor ordered. If you prize yogurt for its active cultures, you know what I'm talking about. Now a new study published in the September 21st online issue of Nature suggests that good bugs might even hold diabetes at bay. Type 1 diabetes is caused by an immune system malfunction. Basically, the immune cells that usually chase after bacteria instead attack the pancreas, wiping out the cells that produce insulin. So researchers decided to see what would happen if they reined in the immune response in mice that are prone to diabetes. As expected, they found that the animals were less likely to develop the disease. But the effect depended entirely on the critters having a normal complement of friendly bacteria in their intestine. Mice that were raised in a totally sterile, germ-free environment were rampant diabetics. But simply treating those mice with a cocktail of bugs found in most mammals' bellies cured the disease. How bacteria in the intestine can stave off diabetes is not yet clear, but the finding could lead to some interesting new treatments. In the meantime, remember that we can't live without the stuff that lives in us.